Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm Matt from Matt's Bookshelf, and today I'm doing a video on my reading as a first year graduate student. So I'm literally in my first week as a English graduate student, and so I thought it'd be fun to do a video discussing the books that I'm supposed to read for this semester. Let's see if I actually will read them, but this is a video talking about what is on my syllabus right now. But yes, I am taking 3 English courses right now. So my first class is Mythology, and the first book I have to read for that class is The Metamorphosis by Rolf Humphreys. Metamorphosis is by Ovid, and it's considered obviously to be one of the greatest works of literature of all time. I've never read it, and I'm excited to read it because this is a very good excuse for me to actually go and dive into the text in the way that I want to. From what I gather, I don't know much about it, but it is a Roman epic, and it talks about the creation myth and a bunch of other Roman stories that I obviously know about but haven't actually read myself. I don't really know much about the translations either, but I know like my professor is, very skilled in this subject. Just I'm assuming this translation is accurate. I know that, especially with these really old pieces, that you really need to appreciate them at their best when it's in like the actual language like Latin, because it's way more complex than what English is now. But I was kind of sort of scanning through the text in the library a couple days ago, and it seemed like it was incredibly well written from what I gather. And yeah, I'm really excited to actually read it. Next up is the Arrestia Trilogy by Cleis. It is translated by Lattimore and Green and is from the Chicago University Press. I've not read this either, but I know what the story is. It follows Agamemnon as he journeys home after the War of Troy, only to be murdered by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover. It is sort of a warning tale for Odysseus in the Odyssey as he comes home, and as he's been away for a very long time, the story makes him think like, oh, what's going to happen when I return home to Ithaca? So, and then this is like an adaptation of, I guess, that warning. And the Arrestia, I think, obviously has the name of Orestes, who is Agamemnon's son, who then seeks revenge for his father, and then is put on trial for his own crimes of murdering his mother, I think, and her lover. And so it's a tragedy. Agamemnon is a very complex and divisive figure, I guess, in the Greek mythology. He's sort of a great warrior from what I gather, but he's also very into himself. So I'll be, especially in the Odyssey, when everyone is in Hades and all I can talk about is himself. So it'll be I'll be interested in seeing how he's adapted in these tales, if you will. If the author Cleis tries to make him sort of a sympathetic character or not, so you feel bad when he's murdered, or if it's just more centered on Orestes and his plight. Again, I don't really know what's going on in this book other than the general story which you hear in the Odyssey. Speaking of the Odyssey, the other book I have to read is Homer's The Odyssey. It's translated by Albert Cook. I actually read the Odyssey a month ago for my Ulysses video. I didn't talk about the Odyssey that much. I didn't do a separate video on it, but I wanted to read the Odyssey because of the parallels it has with James Joyce's Ulysses. And then finally, we have the Aeneid by Virgil. This is the Robert Fitzgerald translation. I have read portions of the Aeneid in high school. I read the chapter where he sleeps with this queen named Dido, and then he leaves her, and then she kills herself by throwing herself into a pyre, and he's just like, okay, whatever. So that's kind of all I remember from the Aeneid. Hopefully this translation gives Aeneas a little more depth than that. I don't know, we'll see. But I know the backstory of the Aeneid. I am a huge fan of ancient Roman history, and this was written during the reign of Augustus Caesar, who was probably one of the most successful historical figures throughout time. And he asked Virgil to write a Roman epic because he felt like Rome, for cultural reasons, needed its own epic story. So Virgil wrote it, but he was dying as the book was being completed, and he requested, and as he was dying, Virgil requested for his, contempt for the people around him to burn the Aeneid, to burn the story, because he didn't want to publish with him being dead. And Augustus is like, do not do that at all. And then so they obviously obeyed Augustus because he's the man in Rome. And now we have the Aeneid. And, honestly, I'm kind of glad that Augustus put his foot down, because from what I've read of the Aeneid, I really enjoyed. But I'm looking forward to reading the text in its full, and especially in succession to all these other, classic mythology stories, because it's one thing to read classic mythology, but it's another thing to read them all in succession like this. So it'll be fascinating to see what I can gather from that, having all the stories fresh in my mind as I'm reading them. So on to my next course, which is the Renaissance, and the first book I have to read is The Book of Courtier by Castiglione Baldassare. This is a Penguin edition I'll have to read. And from what I gather, I've not read it, but from what I gather, it's like sort of like a how-to guide of Renaissance court life and how to be like an expert courtier to a prince. And I think I've skimmed a little bit of it so far, and it's well written. I gotta read more of it, but it's nonfiction, so unlike the other books unlike the mythology stories I just read out, this is like an accurate observation of what court life was like in the Renaissance during this time period. So as someone who really loves medieval history and just history in general, so mostly European history is what I'm most familiar with, but I'm open to other areas as well. But as someone who has mostly studied European history, this will be a very good insight into what like the average court life is like. Because when you read a history book, you just get like mostly the battles are like big strategic moments that you can potentially assume are somewhat bombastic and like how they're told as they've been passed down throughout the years and throughout the centuries for the most part. And so getting like a first-hand account of what court life was like, I think will be something that I'll really enjoy. Next we have Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. I know the story. I think most people know the story. It is Niccolo Machiavelli writing a book to Caesar Borgia, I believe, and instructing him on how to be a good ruler, about how it's better to be feared than loved, and etc. etc. A little story time with Matt. I went to Italy 5 years ago. Oh my god, it was 5 years ago. I actually went to Niccolo Machiavelli's estate in Florence, and it was absolutely beautiful and stunning. And I actually went with my friend Tyler, who as Colorado Wonderland, and he got drunk off 2 glasses of wine and walked into the girls' bathroom. True story. Don't ask me any more about it, though. It did happen. And it was really great. It was probably one of the best nights of my life. And obviously, I kind of wish I'd read The Prince before going to Machiavelli's estate. I think at the time I just graduated from high school, and I was like, probably didn't really appreciate what I was doing at the time. But every year we order wine from the estate because, man, that wine is absolutely incredible that you get from Machiavelli's estate. And that's my long-lasting impact on Machiavelli is the wine. So take that as you will, but it'll be fun to do. And I actually found the book in my library, and there is both the English and the Italian translations. The English is first, and then there's the Italian. And as someone who is very mediocre at reading and speaking Italian, I'm mediocre at reading and I'm awful at speaking, I should say. But I was, it'll be fun to potentially go through the Italian text as well and compare it to the English, because I'm sort of at the level where I can kind of do it with probably a reasonable amount of looking at words as well. But for the most part, I think I can get the general sentence structures as well. So it'll be very fun to do, and maybe I'll do a video on that. Probably not, though, because I wouldn't really know what to talk about, but potentially. Speaking of Italians, we have Pica della Mirandola's An Oration on the Dignity of Man. This is the Hackett translation from 1998, and I do not know anything about this, but it's kind of funny because my last video where I was talking about potentially doing series, I said I wanted to read more Italian literature. So here we go, Italian literature, Niccolo Machiavelli and Mirandola. We'll see how that goes. Maybe I'll do videos on those. Probably, maybe. We'll see how busy I am. Next up, we have Thomas More's Utopia. And I actually have already read Utopia. I read it in high school, I read it in college, part of islands fiction literature. And so it was, literature all revolved around islands. That's when I read The Odyssey as well, which is kind of funny. And I wrote a research paper on it, and it was terrible. It was literally horrible. I basically rushed it out, and I barely got it to the... I was literally within like 3 minutes of the deadline of getting it sent online because it was really bad. Maybe I'll read it. Maybe I'll read it on a YouTube video someday if I'm really desperate, but it was really terrible. But the story itself is really good, and you can look at it through multiple angles. You can view Utopia as not a utopia, as a dystopia, if you can believe it. And potentially going with a new professor, potentially getting a new perspective on the work itself will be fun and exciting, I think. If he has a new perspective, we'll see. Maybe he thinks Utopia is the greatest place ever, and not like my last professor who thought that Utopia was terrible. And honestly, I kind of agree with my last professor that Utopia is not really that great. The text itself is really well written and engaging and thought-provoking, and as an older person now, I'll be excited to read it again. And then we have 2 anthologies. We have Paul Salzman's An Anthology of Elizabethan Prose from Oxford, and I went to school there, and Richard Sylvester's The English 16th Century Verse, an anthology from Norton. I'm sure there's a lot of great stories in here and poetry in here, so we'll see where that goes. I actually have a collection of Oxford prose. I have it right here. 1 second. I have this monster of a book, the New Oxford Book of English Verse. I was at a bookstore with Dronzo, and he said, "You must buy this right now." And I was like, okay, I do not have any free will of my own, so I will buy it. And I've read a couple of the poems, and they're very good, and I'm glad that Drunz made me buy it because it's excellent so far. But it's definitely like something you have to be in the mood to read, and it's not really something you can just like binge read, in my opinion, because poetry, especially poetry of this high regard, really shouldn't be rushed, in my opinion. It should be something that is like thought of and dwelt on if you really want to get the most out of it. So I pick this up from time to time, read a couple poems or what have you, and I enjoy it. And now I'll be even more learned in Renaissance literature and poetry. So very exciting. And finally, for my Renaissance class, we have The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser. Like Ovid's Metamorphosis, from what I gather, it's an epic poem talking about creation myth. But I assume this is more like of a British creation myth. I think Edmund Spenser is British. I'm not particularly sure. But so we fun to compare the two, I guess, if I read them. I'm hopefully going to read them. I'm pretty certain I'm gonna have to read them probably. And so yeah, more fun there. We'll get to that at some point. And my final class is Visions of the Future in Literature. And I have never heard of any of these 3 anthologies books that I have to read. So I'm just going to read them out. And if you've heard of them or read them and you like them, let me know, because I've not heard of any of these. But I think they are contemporary. So this will be, unlike my other 2 classes, these are books that are in stories that are written relatively recently, from what I gather. So yeah, I'll read them out and we'll see if you know of any of them. Alien Days Anthology, a science fiction short story collection. Future Days Anthology, a collection of sci-fi and fantasy adventure short stories. Not One of Us, Stories of Aliens on Earth Anthology Edition, edited by Neil Clark. And I don't have much to say about that, unfortunately. I'm not particularly well read in the sci-fi genre, so this will be my chance to enlighten myself on potential stories here. So those are the books that I'm reading this semester. You can probably expect me to do videos on some of them, not all of them, but some of them, and we'll see how they go. Very kind of eager to get the semester going, because I'm not particularly excited about the fact that I do these courses online. I can go to the library and stuff at the university, but I get very distracted at home, and I was really looking forward to actually being in class, but life had different plans, and make the best of it, and we'll see where it goes. So thank you if you made it this far. Let me know what you think of the books I have to read, and if you like them, or if you want to talk about the translations at all, because I am very naive in translations for books that are not written in English. I just read whatever one I get, and then I assume that it's a masterpiece. So yeah, thank you. Check out my Instagram, which I have a link in the description below, and check out my friends Colorless Wonderland and Drunzo in our film podcast, Film Frauds. By this point, we may have done an episode on Michelangelo Antonioni, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. So watch that, because it'll probably be a very good episode. And yeah, thank you. Check out my other videos. Check out my Ulysses series, because I worked so hard on that. Literally, so many hours were dedicated to James Joyce, and it was worth it the whole way. So most of it was worth it, I should say. And yeah, so thank you, and goodbye.